I never thought the day would come when my own son would celebrate my possible death. My name is Edward Collins, founder of a small tech company I built from scratch 30 years ago. That company, after decades of sleepless nights and sacrifices, was now worth around $4 million. I always believed that one day my son, Ryan, would take over with pride and love. But I was wrong. Everything changed one cold morning when I woke up in the ICU after a massive heart attack. Tubes were running through my arms, machines were beeping beside me, and my body felt heavy as stone. I was barely conscious when the nurse whispered, "Your son is here." For a brief second, I felt relief. He came. My son came. But when I opened my eyes, Ryan wasn't looking at me with concern. He was on his phone, scrolling, texting, not even noticing I was awake. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "Ryan?" He looked at me, emotionless. "You should rest, Dad," he said flatly before walking out. Hours later, one of the younger nurses showed me her phone. "Is that your son?" she asked carefully. There, on social media, Ryan had posted a photo of himself at a bar with the caption, "Finally free." My heart stopped for a moment, not from illness, but from pain. Free? Free from me? From his father? The man who raised him alone after his mother died? I stared at the ceiling in silence, tears sliding down my cheeks. I didn't say a word. For the next few days, Ryan never came back. No calls, no messages. Only my assistant, Julia, visited and took care of business matters. She was the one who told me something I would never forget. "Mr. Collins, Ryan's already meeting with your board members. He's saying you're not going to make it." That's when I knew. He thought I was gone already. He wanted the company, the fortune, the legacy, all of it. Lying there in that hospital bed, I had plenty of time to think. I had trusted him too much, spoiled him too often, blinded myself to his greed. But when I looked around at the nurses and staff who genuinely cared for me, I realized something. Love wasn't about blood. It was about loyalty. 7 long days passed. My body slowly regained strength, and my mind cleared. One evening, as the sunset cast golden light into my room, I asked Julia to bring me my lawyer. She hesitated. "Are you sure, sir?" I smiled weakly. "Yes, I know exactly what I'm doing." That night, I rewrote my will. Every detail, every clause. The $4 million company, everything I had worked for, was going to someone else. Not Ryan, but the person who truly earned it. Someone who stood by me when my own son turned his back. The next morning, I called Ryan. He finally answered, sounding cheerful. "Hey, Dad, how are you feeling? I've been so busy with the company stuff." I interrupted. "I know. You've been busy celebrating my death." There was silence on the line. Then he stammered, "Dad, that's not—" "Save it," I said. "You made your choice, and I've made mine." And with that, I hung up. That single call changed everything. He just didn't know it yet. When I hung up that call with Ryan, the silence in my hospital room was heavier than anything I had ever felt before. The monitor beside me beeped softly. The air smelled of disinfectant, and outside the window the sun was slowly setting, painting the sky in orange and gold. I knew that call would be the beginning of something irreversible. My son didn't know it yet, but the world he thought he owned was about to collapse. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Julia drove me home. She had been my assistant for nearly 15 years, loyal, dedicated, and honest. She was more of a daughter to me than Ryan had ever been a son. When we reached my house, the front door was wide open. Inside, I found Ryan sitting in my office chair, legs up on my desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked at me like I was a ghost. "You're supposed to be resting," he said with fake concern. I smiled faintly. "And you're supposed to be my son." He looked away. "Dad, come on, you've been sick. The company needs leadership. I'm just trying to keep things running." I studied his face. He wasn't nervous. He truly believed he was entitled to everything I had built. "You think it's yours, don't you?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "You built it for me anyway. That was the moment I realized there was no saving him. The greed had already eaten his soul. I walked slowly to the window and looked at the city skyline. So much of my life was out there. Every building, every client, every sleepless night, all for a man who now sat behind my desk planning how to erase me. I turned back to him and said softly, "You'll get what you deserve, Ryan. Just remember that." He laughed. "Sure, Dad, whatever that means." The next morning, he arrived at the company headquarters, expecting to hold a meeting as acting CEO. But when he walked into the boardroom, the faces around the table were tense and confused. Julia was there, and so was my lawyer, Mr. Harris. Ryan frowned. "What's going on? Where's my father?" Harris adjusted his glasses. "Your father is alive and well, Mr. Collins, and he has made some changes." Ryan's smirk faded. "Changes?" "Yes," Harris continued. "Your father has legally transferred ownership of Collins Tech to a new beneficiary, effective immediately." Ryan's voice rose. "What do you mean? I'm his only son." Julia looked at him with calm eyes. "You were his son, Ryan, but you stopped being family when you wished him dead." He froze. "What are you talking about?" She opened her tablet and played a recording. Ryan's voice came through loud and clear. He was at a bar bragging to friends about how soon he'd be running the whole company once his old man finally kicked the bucket. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Ryan's face turned pale. "You recorded me?" he whispered. Julia nodded. "I did, because I knew one day you'd deny it." Just then, the door opened. I walked in. My steps were slow but steady. Everyone stood. Ryan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Dad!" I looked straight at him. "You were so sure I'd never wake up, weren't you?" He started to speak, but I raised a hand. "Don't bother. I've heard enough." I turned to the board members. Effective immediately, Ryan Collins is removed from all company positions. Security will escort him out. He shouted, "You can't do this! I'm your son!" I looked at him, my heart aching but firm. "I may have given you life, Ryan, but you chose greed over love. The company belongs to someone who actually cared whether I lived or died." Ryan's jaw clenched. "Who? Julia?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, Julia." The room murmured in surprise. Julia looked stunned. "Sir, I said gently, "You were there when I needed someone. You made sure I didn't die alone. That means more than blood ever will." Ryan stormed out, shouting threats, but I didn't stop him. I knew he'd try to fight it, maybe even sue, but the will was ironclad. The following weeks were quiet. Julia officially became CEO, and under her leadership, the company grew stronger than ever. The media called it a shocking twist, but for me, it was justice. One evening, a letter arrived from Ryan. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand. He wanted money, claiming I owed him something. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat in my study and thought about the choices I had made. Changing my will wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. I wanted to leave something in hands that valued it, not destroy it for greed. A month later, Julia came into my office with tears in her eyes. She said, "There's someone here to see you." When I looked up, Ryan stood in the doorway. His face was tired, his eyes red. He looked nothing like the arrogant man I had seen weeks ago. "Dad," I said quietly, "I messed up." I didn't say anything. He stepped closer. "I don't want the money. I don't want the company. I just want you to forgive me." I studied him for a long moment. There was sincerity in his eyes, but also shame. I sighed deeply. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for, Ryan. It's something you earn." He nodded slowly. "Then let me earn it." We talked for hours that night. For the first time in years, he listened. He didn't argue, didn't demand, just listened. When he left, I didn't promise him anything, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, the son I lost to greed was finding his way back. The next morning, I went out to the balcony, the sunrise reflecting on the glass buildings below. I smiled to myself, remembering that terrible post. Finally free. I whispered softly, "Yes, son, we both are finally free." Days passed after that night, and though Ryan's visit left a strange warmth in my heart, I couldn't bring myself to trust him yet. Words are easy, but change takes time. Every morning I'd find myself wondering if he'd call, if he'd show up again, but most days the phone stayed silent. Julia, on the other hand, was running the company flawlessly. She kept me updated, made sure I took my medications, and even brought me homemade meals sometimes. The house didn't feel so empty when she was around. One evening as we sat on the porch, Julia looked at me and said, "Do you think he really meant it, Mr. Collins, what your son said?" I stared at the horizon for a moment. I want to believe he did, but I've seen the damage greed can do. Trust isn't built in a single apology. She nodded quietly, then said something that stayed in my mind all night. "Maybe he's trying to be the man you hoped he'd become. Sometimes people have to lose everything to understand what really matters." Later that week, I received an unexpected email from one of our oldest clients. It said Ryan had reached out to them, not for money, not for business, but to apologize for his behavior during the time I was hospitalized. He told them he'd been blind with ambition and that he was trying to make things right. That message struck me deeply. Maybe, just maybe, Julia was right. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I walked into my study and looked at an old photo on the wall. Ryan, at 10 years old, sitting on my shoulders, both of us laughing. It felt like a lifetime ago. I sat down and began writing a letter, not to give him anything back, not yet, but to tell him that I saw his effort, that I noticed. The next morning, before I could send the letter, the doorbell rang. It was Ryan. He looked different, clean-shaven, wearing a simple shirt, no expensive watch or attitude. He handed me a folder. "These are the charity reports," he said softly. "I've been volunteering at the Veterans Shelter downtown. They help me see things differently." I opened the folder and saw photos of him serving meals, cleaning rooms, even helping fix the building's broken plumbing. My chest tightened with emotion. "Are you serious about this?" I asked. He nodded. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Dad, but I want to earn it, one day at a time." I didn't say anything for a while. The air between us was heavy with all the things left unsaid over the years. Then I finally spoke. "Sit down, Ryan." He did. "You know, when I was lying in that hospital bed, I wasn't angry at you for wanting the company. I was hurt that my son, the boy who once followed me everywhere, had turned into someone who saw me as a wallet, not a father." He lowered his head. "I know, and I hate who I became." "Good," I said quietly. "That means you can change." We talked for hours again, but this time it felt different. There was no defense in his tone, no excuses, just truth. He admitted to his jealousy toward Julia, his resentment toward me for always focusing on work, and his guilt for not being there when I needed him most. I listened. For the first time in years, I listened not as a disappointed father, but as a man who had finally stopped expecting perfection. As the night grew darker, Ryan said something that pierced straight through me. "When Mom died, I never really got over it. I thought if I could be successful, you'd notice me again. But I lost myself trying to earn something I already had. You." I felt my throat tighten. "Ryan." He wiped his eyes quickly. "I know it's too late to fix the past, but maybe I can still fix myself." I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "It's never too late, son." We sat there in silence for a long time, two broken pieces trying to fit back together. Outside, the sound of crickets filled the night, and for the first time the house didn't feel like an empty monument to regret. But deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. Ryan was changing, but the world we built, the company, the legacy, was still in Julia's hands. I didn't know if I would ever give it back to him, or even if I should.
Yet something inside me whispered that maybe fate wasn't done with us yet. Because sometimes the hardest part of forgiveness isn't saying, "I forgive you." It's learning to trust again. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. At least not yet.
Weeks turned into months, and little by little, Ryan became a regular part of my life again. He would come over every Sunday morning with coffee and breakfast, and we'd sit on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. Sometimes we talked about business, sometimes about Mom, sometimes about nothing at all. But every time he left, I could feel the sincerity in his voice when he said, "See you soon, Dad." Still, I didn't let my guard down completely. Trust takes time, and though I could see he was trying, part of me feared it might all be temporary, a guilt-driven phase. Julia never said anything bad about Ryan, but I could tell she was cautious too. One afternoon, she came into my office holding a report. "Mr. Collins, there's something you should see," she said. I took the document and scanned through it. It was about a new contract proposal, one that Ryan had submitted to the board himself. "He's been working on this for 3 months," Julia explained. "He's pitching it as a partnership with the veteran shelter. He says he wants the company to invest in rehabilitation programs for soldiers." I looked up at her. "He's serious?" "It seems so," she said softly. "He's not asking for money or shares. He just wants the company's name behind the cause." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. This was something the old Ryan would never have done. It wasn't about profit or image, it was about purpose. "Set up a meeting," I said. "I want to hear him present it." The next day, Ryan walked into the boardroom dressed modestly. No flashy suit, no arrogance. He greeted everyone respectfully, including Julia, and began his presentation. He spoke about veterans struggling to find jobs, about second chances, and about how our company could use its resources to create tech-based employment programs. The board was silent when he finished. Then Julia smiled and started clapping. Others followed. I just sat there watching him with quiet pride. After the meeting, I called him into my office. "That was impressive," I said. He smiled nervously. "I wasn't sure you'd like it." "I didn't just like it," I said slowly. "I believed it." His eyes glistened. "That means a lot, Dad." I studied him carefully. "You've changed." He nodded. "I had to. The man I was before didn't deserve what you built. I want to earn your respect, not your money." For the first time in a long time, I felt my guard beginning to lower. I didn't say anything, but inside something softened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty halls of my house, memories echoing with every step. I stopped at my study and looked at the safe where my will was kept. I opened it, staring at the documents that had once been my final act of justice. And for the first time, I hesitated. Could I really forgive him enough to trust him with the company again? Should I? The next morning, before I could decide, life threw a curveball. Julia burst into my house, panic on her face. "Mr. Collins, there's been an accident. Ryan." My heart stopped. What happened? "He was on his way to meet investors for the veterans program. A drunk driver ran a red light. He's in surgery now." The room spun around me. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door. At the hospital, everything felt too familiar. The smell, the sterile white walls, the hum of machines. It was like time had reversed. I sat outside the emergency room, my hands trembling, memories flooding back of the last time I had been here fighting for my own life, while Ryan had been out celebrating. Now it was me waiting for him, praying he would live. Hours passed before the doctor came out. "He's stable," he said. "It was close, but he's going to make it." Relief washed over me so hard I nearly collapsed. I went into his room and saw him lying there, pale and bandaged, machines softly beeping beside him. I sat next to his bed, my chest tight. "You fought for your life this time, son. And I'm fighting for you too." Julia quietly placed her hand on my shoulder. "He's different now," she said. "He didn't even tell anyone he was meeting investors. He just wanted to prove himself to you." I looked at Ryan, unconscious but peaceful, and for the first time in years, I saw not the man who'd betrayed me, but the boy who once looked up to me with pride. I reached out and held his hand gently. "We'll get it right this time," I said softly. But deep inside, a strange feeling stirred. Something told me this accident wasn't just bad luck. The drunk driver, the timing, the secrecy, it all felt too coincidental. I didn't know it yet, but what was about to come next would change everything once again, in ways none of us could imagine.
The next morning, I returned to the hospital early, long before visiting hours began. The halls were quiet, the smell of disinfectant strong, and the only sound was the rhythmic beeping from Ryan's monitor. He was still unconscious, his face pale but calm. I sat beside him and whispered, "You're going to be fine, son. You've come too far to stop now." I stayed there for hours, just watching him breathe. Around noon, Julia arrived with a folder in her hand and a worried look on her face. "Mr. Collins," she said in a low voice, "I need to show you something." We stepped into the hallway, and she handed me the folder. Inside were printed reports, police findings, insurance documents, and a few photographs. "I thought the accident was random," she said softly. "But the police found something strange. The car that hit Ryan wasn't registered to the driver who was arrested. It was a rental, paid for by someone under a fake name." I frowned. "Are you saying it wasn't an accident?" She nodded slowly. "It looks deliberate." My blood ran cold. "Who would want to hurt him?" Julia hesitated. "That's what worries me. There's someone from the board, Thomas Reed. He's been fighting your decision to remove Ryan from the company. He lost a lot of power when you rewrote the will. Maybe he thought Ryan's comeback would ruin his plans." I clenched my fists. "If that's true, he tried to kill my son." Julia looked uneasy. "We don't have proof yet, but I've already asked a private investigator to dig deeper." I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of rage and fear. "Keep this quiet. Ryan doesn't need to know until we're sure." When I went back into the room, Ryan was awake. His voice was weak, but he managed to smile. "Hey, old man." I smiled through the pain. "You scared me half to death." He winced. "Guess we're even now." We both laughed, and for a moment it felt like all the years of distance had melted away. Then his expression turned serious. "Dad, I think the car that hit me wasn't an accident." My heart skipped. "Why do you say that?" "Because," he said quietly, "the driver didn't even try to stop. He looked right at me before hitting the brakes too late. It was like he wanted to do it." I didn't tell him about what Julia had found. Not yet. "You need to rest, Ryan. Let's not jump to conclusions." He nodded weakly, but I could see the fear in his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I paced the hospital corridors, replaying everything in my head. The company takeover, the will, the redemption, and now this. Was someone targeting my family because of the decisions I made? Or was there something deeper behind it all? The next day, Julia called. "We found something," she said. "The fake name used for the rental, it matches an account linked to an offshore fund that used to receive payments from Collins Tech back when Reed managed the financials." I froze. So it was him. "We can't prove it legally yet," she warned, "but it's almost certain." My hands shook with anger. Thomas Reed had been with me since the early days. He helped me grow the company, sat at my dinner table, toasted my success. The thought that he'd betray me and try to harm my son was almost unbearable. I said finally, "We'll handle this quietly. If he wanted to destroy my family, he'll learn what that costs." The next week, as Ryan recovered, I started attending board meetings again. Reed pretended to act concerned, asking about Ryan's health, putting on his usual fake charm.
but I could see it in his eyes: guilt, fear, and something darker. I said nothing. Not yet. I was planning my next move. When Ryan finally came home from the hospital, he was weaker but determined. "I'm not quitting, Dad. Whoever did this won't win." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You're right, but we'll be smart about it. No more rushing into danger." He nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else I didn't tell you. The night before the accident, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, 'You should have stayed gone.' I thought it was spam. Now I think it was a warning." My stomach twisted. Whoever wanted him gone wasn't finished yet. That night, I stood by my office window, city lights glowing in the distance, and realized the truth. This wasn't just about money or control. Someone was trying to erase the Collins name completely, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. Not after everything we'd survived. The battle that was coming would test not just our strength, but the fragile bond Ryan and I had rebuilt. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't end with forgiveness. It begins with a fight.
The next few weeks felt like walking through a storm that never ended. Ryan was slowly healing, but every time his phone buzzed, every time a car slowed down outside the house, we both felt that same wave of unease. Julia's investigation was progressing quietly. She was cautious, meeting contacts in cafes, collecting documents, piecing together the puzzle no one else dared to touch. One evening, she came by the house with her laptop, her face pale. "Mr. Collins, you need to see this." She showed me a series of bank transfers from a shell company based in Panama. The recipient was Thomas Reed's cousin, a man with no business ties to Collins Tech. The amounts matched the exact payments made to the rental service used in Ryan's accident. My hands trembled. "So it's confirmed." Julia nodded. "It's more than that. Reed has been moving money out of the company for years, laundering it through offshore accounts. When Ryan came back and started working with charities, Reed panicked. He knew that once Ryan gained access again, his embezzlement would be exposed." I sat in silence, anger boiling beneath the calm surface. "He tried to silence him," I whispered. Julia looked at me carefully. "What are you going to do?" I turned toward the window, watching the city lights flicker like dying stars. "I'm going to make sure Reed never sets foot near my family again. But we'll do it legally. No mistakes." The next morning, Ryan joined us in the living room. His arm was still in a sling, but his determination hadn't faded. "Dad," he said, "I want to confront him." I shook my head. "No, not yet. Let the evidence speak first." "I can't just sit here," he said. "He tried to kill me." I walked closer and put a hand on his shoulder. "You'll get your chance, son, but not with anger. We're going to do this the right way." Over the next few days, Julia and I met with a federal investigator who had been tracking corporate fraud cases. We handed over the documents, the bank statements, the phone records, all of it. The agent listened carefully and said, "This is solid, but if you want him behind bars, we'll need one last piece, proof he ordered the hit." That proof came sooner than expected. One night, Julia received an encrypted voicemail left on her office phone. A man's voice, nervous and shaking, said, "Tell Collins I'm sorry. Reed made me do it. He said if I didn't drive that car, he'd ruin my family." Then the line cut off. I felt my chest tighten. The driver from the accident? He's alive? Julia nodded. He turned himself in tonight. The pieces were finally falling into place, but the danger wasn't over. The next morning, Reed called me himself. His tone was cold, too calm. "Edward, I hear you've been digging around in places you shouldn't." "You tried to kill my son," I said through gritted teeth. He chuckled. "That's quite the accusation. Be careful, my friend. You're not as untouchable as you think. I have everything I need to destroy you." "Then do it. But remember,
"If I go down, I'm not going alone." Then the line went dead. I stood there in my office, the silence deafening. Julia was watching me from the doorway. "He's desperate," she said quietly. "That makes him dangerous." I nodded. "We'll be ready." That night, I told Ryan everything, the evidence, the confession, the threat. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Dad, I'm not afraid anymore. I was when I first woke up in that hospital, but now I know why this happened. I needed to understand what you went through. Being betrayed by someone you trusted. I get it now." His words cut deep. "I don't want revenge," he continued. "I just want peace, for both of us." I looked at him, pride and sorrow tangled in my chest. "You've grown, son, more than I ever hoped you would." But even as I said it, I could feel that peace slipping further away. The storm wasn't done with us yet. That night, Julia called again, panic in her voice. "Mr. Collins, you need to come to the office right now. Someone broke in. Everything's been ransacked. Files are missing, computers wiped clean." My blood froze. "Reed? Who else?" she whispered. "He's covering his tracks." I hung up and looked at Ryan, who was already grabbing his coat despite the pain in his arm. "You're not going alone. Not this time." We drove through the night, headlights slicing through the fog. As we reached the office, the front door was ajar, lights flickering inside. Julia was waiting for us, shaken but unharmed. "He's gone," she said, "but he left something behind." On her desk was a single envelope with my name written in bold black ink. I picked it up and opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. Me, Ryan, and Julia standing outside the company building, smiling. On the back, in red ink, were the words, "This isn't over."
The air inside the office was thick with tension, the hum of the broken lights flickering above us like a warning. I stood there staring at that photo, my own smiling face mocking me from a happier time. Ryan leaned closer and read the red ink message, his jaw tightening. "He's playing with us," he said quietly. Julia was pacing near the doorway, whispering, "He broke in without triggering any alarms. That means someone from inside helped him." I turned to her. "You think we've got a mole?" She nodded. "Someone who still answers to Reed. I've already checked the security logs. Half of them were erased remotely, and that takes admin clearance." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration boiling beneath the calm. "We're being watched," I muttered. "Every move we make." Ryan stepped forward. "Then we stop reacting and start acting. Let's turn the tables." I looked at him. His voice carried the same edge I once had when I was younger, full of fire and strategy. "What do you have in mind?" "We leak false info," he said. "Something Reed can't resist chasing. If he's still in contact with someone inside, they'll take the bait, and we'll trace it." Julia's eyes widened. "That could work, but it's risky. If he figures it out—" "He won't," Ryan interrupted. "Not if we make it believable." For the first time, I realized my son wasn't just trying to redeem himself anymore. He was protecting me. That same night, we stayed in the office setting the trap. Julia crafted a fake email thread showing that the company had backed up all financial data, including Reed's old transactions, to an external server. We let it accidentally leak through an internal memo, knowing Reed's spy would find it. Then we waited. Days passed in silence. Ryan tried to act normal, attending meetings and visiting the rehab centers. I stayed home, pretending to rest, though my phone never left my hand. On the fourth night, Julia called. "He took the bait," she whispered. "Someone just tried to hack the decoy server from an IP traced to an abandoned warehouse on the east side." My pulse quickened. "Call the investigator. Tell him to meet us there." Within an hour, Ryan and I were standing outside that dark warehouse, the streets silent except for the distant hum of city traffic. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "We should wait for backup." Ryan shook his head. If Reed's here, I'm not letting him slip away again. We moved quietly through the shadows, the faint sound of typing echoing from inside. Through a cracked window we saw him, Thomas Reed, older now, hair grayer, but eyes sharp as ever. He was hunched over a laptop, muttering to himself. Erase the logs, wipe everything. He looked like a man cornered by his own demons. I signaled Julia's investigator, who was waiting near the exit. They nodded, ready to act. But before we could move, Ryan's phone buzzed, too loud. Reed froze. His head snapped toward the window. "Who's there?" he barked. Ryan cursed under his breath. Within seconds, Reed grabbed a pistol from the table and aimed it toward the shadows. "I know you're here, Edward. You think you can destroy me? You forgot who built this empire with you?" I stepped out slowly, hands raised. "You built nothing but lies, Thomas. I trusted you." "Trust?" He laughed bitterly. "You replaced me with your perfect son and your perfect assistant. You think you can erase me like I'm nothing?" "You tried to kill my son," I shouted back. "You crossed the line I can never forgive." His voice cracked with fury. "He was going to ruin everything. You both were." Before I could respond, a sharp sound cut through the air. A shotgun. Julia screamed from outside. I ducked behind a pillar as Reed's bullet shattered glass and sent sparks flying. Ryan pulled me down behind a desk, breathing hard. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I whispered, clutching his arm. The investigator called out, "Put the weapon down, Reed. The police are on their way." But Reed only laughed. "You think I'm afraid of prison? I'd rather burn with the truth than rot with your lies." He turned toward the laptop again, typing furiously. Julia whispered through her earpiece, "He's trying to delete everything, every piece of evidence." Ryan looked at me, his eyes fierce. "We can't let him." Before I could stop him, Ryan dashed from cover and tackled Reed to the ground. The gun clattered across the floor. They struggled, grunting, glass crunching under their feet. I rushed forward, trying to help, but suddenly a fire alarm blared. The heat from a knocked-over lantern had ignited a stack of papers. Flames began to spread, smoke rising fast. "Ryan!" I shouted, coughing. He pushed Reed away and grabbed the laptop, yanking out the hard drive before the flames reached it. "Got it!" he yelled. "Let's go!" But Reed lunged again, grabbing Ryan's arm. "If I go down, you go down too," he snarled. Ryan punched him, breaking free, and pulled me toward the exit. We stumbled out into the night just as the investigator and 2 officers rushed in. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. The warehouse was engulfed, orange fire reflecting off the dark sky. I watched as Reed was dragged out, coughing and screaming, "It's not over. You'll regret this, Edward." I turned away, my body trembling. Ryan stood beside me, covered in soot, clutching the scorched hard drive. "It's over for him," he said quietly. "But not for us," I replied. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. We had survived betrayal, greed, and death itself. But every victory came with a price. And somewhere inside that hard drive, buried in all the data, was something we hadn't yet seen. Something that would change everything once again. A week after the warehouse fire, the world seemed to settle into uneasy quiet. Thomas Reed was in custody, the media had caught wind of the corporate scandal turned arson mystery, and Ryan's photo was all over the news, labeled a hero son who saved millions in company data. But I knew the truth was far deeper than headlines could ever show. That hard drive, the one Ryan had risked his life to save, was sitting in a fireproof box in my study. It had survived the flames, but we hadn't dared open it yet. Something about Reed's last words, "You'll regret this, Edward," still haunted me. That night, when the house was silent, Ryan came into my office. "Dad," he said quietly, "we should look at it. We need to know what's inside." I hesitated, staring at the box. "Once we open it, there's no going back."
He placed a hand on my shoulder. "We've already gone too far to stop." Together we sat down, connecting the drive to my laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing folders named innocently investments, tax reports, contracts. But hidden beneath them was one that caught our attention: legacy. Ryan clicked it open. Inside were encrypted documents and a series of videos labeled by year. The first was from 2001. I pressed play. There I was, 30 years younger, standing beside Thomas Reed and a man I hadn't seen in decades, my first investor, Charles Morton. The video was grainy but clear enough. "Edward," Charles said, his voice shaking, "if this ever surfaces, it'll destroy us." Reed's voice cut in. "We did what we had to do. No one needs to know where the seed money came from." My stomach tightened. Ryan looked at me in disbelief. "Dad, what is this?" I could barely speak. Before Collins Tech was big, we needed capital fast. A silent partner came in, a man who was later investigated for laundering money. We never took it knowingly, but once the company took off, Reed insisted we bury it. I thought he destroyed all the records. Ryan scrolled through the files, his expression darkening. "These videos, they show everything. Reed wasn't just corrupt. He kept evidence to use against you. That's why he wanted you gone." My head dropped into my hands. He was building insurance against me all along. "But there's more," Ryan said, clicking another video. In it, Reed was sitting in his office, speaking to someone off camera. "Edward's too old to lead now. Once he's out, I'll take full control. If the son resists, he'll meet an accident. I've handled bigger problems before." My blood froze. Ryan paused the video, anger flashing in his eyes. "He planned my death." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of every betrayal crash over me. "And he would have succeeded if you hadn't survived." Ryan leaned back, taking a deep breath. "We have enough here to bury him forever." I looked at the hard drive, then at my son, and to destroy everything we built if we release it publicly. The company, the foundation, it'll all collapse. Silence hung between us. Then Ryan said softly, "Maybe it's time the truth stood on its own, even if it burns everything else." I studied him, realizing how much he'd grown, how much I'd underestimated him. "You're right," I said finally. "This family's been built on lies long enough." The next day, with Julia's help, we turned the drive over to the authorities. The investigation widened, reaching back decades. The media storm was brutal. Collins Tech's stock plummeted, sponsors withdrew, board members panicked. But amid the chaos, something miraculous happened. People saw the truth. They saw a father who came forward instead of hiding behind wealth, and a son who chose integrity over revenge. The public began calling it the Collins Redemption. Months later, after the trials ended and Reed was sentenced to life for conspiracy, I stood beside Ryan at the small park outside the courthouse. The air was crisp, autumn leaves swirling around us. "I lost everything we built," I said quietly. "No," Ryan replied. "We just built something new." He pointed toward a nearby construction site where a new foundation was being laid, a nonprofit tech academy for underprivileged students, funded by what was left of our assets. "This is what matters," he said. "A legacy that can't be bought or faked." I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. "Your mother would have been proud," I said. Ryan looked at me with a soft grin. "She'd probably tell us we finally stopped being idiots." We both laughed, and for the first time, it felt genuine. Not the nervous laughter of survivors, but the calm of people who had made peace with their scars. As we walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, warm light spilling across the street. I glanced back one last time at the courthouse where everything had ended and begun again. In that moment, I realized something profound. Money fades, buildings crumble, reputations shatter, but truth endures. And sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see what was worth saving.